Thomas Jefferson, architect of American liberty. A patriotic story of America's founding visionary. Prologue: The making of a revolutionary mind. On April 13, 1743, in the Virginia wilderness at Shadwell Plantation in Goochland County, a child was born who would help shape the destiny of a nation yet to exist. Thomas Jefferson entered a world where 13 British colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast, where most men never questioned the divine right of kings, and where the very idea of self-government seemed as distant as the stars. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a self-made man, a surveyor and planter who had carved prosperity from the untamed frontier. From him, young Thomas inherited a love of the land and an appreciation for honest labor. His mother, Jane Randolph Jefferson, came from Virginia's aristocracy, connecting the family to the colony's established gentry. Yet Thomas would grow to reject the very notion of inherited privilege, believing instead that merit, not birth, should determine a man's place in society. The boy grew strong in body and mind amid the rolling hills and blue mountains of Virginia. He learned to ride before he could properly read, but once books entered his life, they never left. By candlelight in the family's modest home, young Jefferson devoured every volume he could find. At age 9, when his father died, Thomas inherited not only land and slaves but also his father's library, a treasure that sparked an insatiable hunger for knowledge. At the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Jefferson studied under the brilliant George Wythe, who taught him that law must rest on reason and justice, not merely tradition or royal decree. Jefferson learned Greek, Latin, French, Italian, and Spanish. He studied mathematics, philosophy, and natural sciences. But most importantly, he absorbed the radical new ideas flowing from European Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke's theories of natural rights, Montesquieu's vision of balanced government, and the ancient republic's examples of citizen self-rule. These weren't mere academic exercises. Jefferson believed deeply that governments exist only to secure the natural rights of individuals, life, liberty, and property. He came to see that true human dignity required freedom to work one's own land, speak one's own mind, worship according to one's own conscience, all without the oppressive hand of distant rulers. Chapter 1: The Storm Gathering, 1769 to 1775. In 1769, at just 26 years old, Jefferson took his seat in Virginia's House of Burgesses. The young lawyer had already begun designing Monticello, his mountaintop estate, where he envisioned a home reflecting Enlightenment ideals, elegant yet functional, a place where ideas could flourish as freely as the Virginia breeze. But dark clouds gathered over the colonies. King George III and Parliament had decided the American colonies must pay for the recent French and Indian War. They imposed taxes without colonial representation, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, duties on tea. To Jefferson and many colonists, this violated the ancient principle that Englishmen could not be taxed without their consent. Jefferson watched as British soldiers occupied Boston, as customs officials harassed merchants, as royal governors dissolved assemblies that dared protest. The colonies weren't asking for independence, not yet. They simply wanted their rights as Englishmen respected. For most of the 18th century, the relationship between Britain and her American colonies was mutually beneficial, with colonists enjoying protection and opportunity in exchange for loyalty and trade. But in 1774, Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts, punishing all of Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party by closing the port and imposing martial law. Jefferson, though ill with dysentery, prepared a bold response, a summary view of the rights of British America. In this pamphlet, he declared that Americans possessed the same rights as any free people, that they were entitled to self-government, free from arbitrary tyranny. His words rang out, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time." This wasn't abstract philosophy to Jefferson. He saw his neighbors struggling under British restrictions on Western settlement, watched as colonial legislatures were dissolved for asserting rights, witnessed the king's soldiers treating free colonists as subjects to be cowed. Liberty, in Jefferson's mind, was the very foundation of human dignity. Chapter 2, The Declaration That Changed the World, 1775 to 1776. On April 19, 1775, shots rang out at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolution had begun. Yet even then, most colonists believed that the British Empire offered its citizens freedom and provided them protection and opportunity. As late as June 1775, Thomas Jefferson said that he would rather be independence on Great Britain, properly limited, than on any nation upon earth, or than on no nation. But King George III declared the colonies in rebellion and sent armies to crush dissent. American petitions for redress were ignored. British warships blockaded ports. Hessian mercenaries were hired to fight fellow English subjects. It became clear reconciliation was impossible. In June 1776, Virginia's Richard Henry Lee stood before the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia and moved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. The moment had arrived. Congress appointed a committee to explain this momentous decision to the world: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson. Why Jefferson? He had earned a reputation as an eloquent writer after his Some Review. As he wrote in 1823, the other members of the committee unanimously pressed on myself alone to undertake the draft. I consented. I drew it. In a rented room on Market Street in Philadelphia, with his enslaved valet Robert Hemmings attending to his needs, Jefferson set to work. Jefferson largely wrote the Declaration of Independence in isolation between June 11, 1776, and June 28, 1776. On a portable writing desk designed by himself, he poured his soul onto paper. He drew from his readings of Locke, from the Virginia Declaration of Rights drafted by George Mason, from his own draft Virginia Constitution. But the words that emerged were uniquely his, words that would echo through the centuries. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These weren't just fine words. They were a revolutionary manifesto. Jefferson argued that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when any government becomes destructive of these rights, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. He listed 27 grievances against King George III, not Parliament, because Jefferson believed the colonies were bound to the crown through their own consent, not through Parliament's authority. The king had violated the social contract. He had sent armies to suppress peaceful petitions. He had dissolved legislatures. He had obstructed justice and kept standing armies among the people in peacetime. Congress debated and edited. Some wanted to soften Jefferson's passionate condemnation of the slave trade, an issue that would haunt Jefferson and America for generations. But the core remained. The Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. Bells rang throughout Philadelphia. Copies spread like wildfire through all 13 colonies. General Washington had it read to his troops. In taverns and town squares, Americans heard Jefferson's words and understood, they fought not for mere independence, but for the principle that free people have the right to govern themselves. Chapter 3, Virginia's Reformer, 1776 to 1784. Even as war raged, Jefferson turned his attention to rebuilding Virginia's laws. He believed independence meant nothing if old tyrannies simply wore new faces. He worked to abolish primogeniture and entail, laws that kept land in the hands of aristocratic families, believing that a republic needed citizens who owned property, not a landed nobility. Most importantly, in 1777 Jefferson drafted the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. For years he fought for its passage, and in 1786 it finally became law. The statute declared that our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions, and that compelling belief is sinful and tyrannical. No government could dictate what a person must believe. Here was libertarian philosophy made real: the state must never intrude on the conscience. As governor during the darkest days of the Revolution, 1779 to 1781, Jefferson organized Virginia's defenses, though his tenure ended controversially when British forces raided the state. Critics questioned his performance, but history would vindicate his broader vision for reform. Chapter 4, Witnessing Revolution Abroad, 1784 to 1789. Congress sent Jefferson to Paris as minister to France in 1785. There, amid the gilded salons of Versailles and the intellectual ferment of pre-revolutionary France, Jefferson represented the young republic. He befriended the Marquis de Lafayette, advised French reformers on human rights, and championed American ideals of liberty. In Paris, Jefferson observed European monarchies up close: their waste, their oppression, their disregard for common people. It reinforced every belief he held about the dangers of concentrated power. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Jefferson sympathized with the revolutionaries' goals, though he would later worry they had gone too far, too fast. During these years abroad, disturbing news reached him: the Constitutional Convention had drafted a new framework for American government, replacing the weak Articles of Confederation. Jefferson worried. The Constitution granted significant powers to a central government. Where were the protections for individual rights? He wrote urgently to his friend James Madison, "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth." Thanks largely to Jefferson's influence, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, were added, enshrining freedoms of speech, religion, press, assembly, and protection against unreasonable government intrusion. Jefferson articulated a vision of limited government that would shape American political thought. Government should restrain men from harming one another, but otherwise leave them free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement. Chapter 5, The Birth of American Political Parties, 1790 to 1800. Returning home in 1789, Jefferson became America's first Secretary of State under President Washington. Almost immediately, he clashed with Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. The conflict wasn't personal, it was philosophical, a debate about America's very soul. Hamilton wanted a strong national bank, high tariffs to protect manufacturing, and federal assumption of state debts. Jefferson saw danger in every proposal. A national bank? Not authorized by the Constitution, and it would benefit wealthy speculators over honest farmers. High tariffs. They enriched merchants while raising costs for everyone else. Debt assumption? It rewarded states that had been fiscally irresponsible. Jefferson idealized the yeoman farmer, the independent landowner who tilled his own soil, raised his own family, and needed no master. "Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God," he wrote. A nation of such farmers, he believed, would preserve liberty far better than a nation of urban wage workers dependent on factory owners and bankers. From this dispute emerged America's first political parties. Jefferson and Madison formed the Democratic-Republican Party, often called the Republicans, to oppose Hamilton's Federalists. The battle was joined. The 1790s brought crisis after crisis. France's Revolution turned bloody. Britain and France went to war. America struggled to remain neutral. The Federalists, fearing French radicalism, passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, laws that criminalized criticism of the government. To Jefferson, this was tyranny reborn. Free speech, the very first freedom protected by the Bill of Rights, was under assault. Jefferson feared the acts would be used in a partisan way and violated the 10th Amendment by encroaching on a state prerogative. Secretly, he drafted the Kentucky Resolutions, arguing that states retain the right to resist unconstitutional federal laws. Chapter 6, The Revolution of 1800. The election of 1800 pitted Jefferson against John Adams, his old friend turned rival. The campaign was vicious by any standard. Federalists called Jefferson an atheist, a radical, a threat to social order. Republicans painted Adams as a would-be monarch, surrounded by aristocratic pretensions. The election ended in a tie between Jefferson and Aaron Burr in the Electoral College, throwing the decision to the House of Representatives. For weeks, the outcome hung in balance. Finally, ironically with Hamilton's reluctant support, Jefferson prevailed. On October 20, 1803, the Senate voted for ratification 24-7 of what would become Jefferson's greatest presidential triumph, though it hadn't happened yet. But first came his inaugural address on March 4, 1801, words of healing after bitter division. "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists," he declared. "Though we disagree on means, we share common ends, equal and exact justice to all men, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, the support of the state governments in all their rights, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and economy in the public expense." Jefferson meant every word. He immediately set about reducing government. He slashed federal spending, cut taxes, especially the hated whiskey tax that fell hardest on Western farmers, reduced the Army and Navy, and began paying down the national debt. He proved that government could be small, frugal, and unobtrusive while still protecting liberty and promoting prosperity. Chapter 7, An Empire for Liberty, 1803 to 1809. In 1800, Spain had secretly ceded the vast Louisiana territory back to France. When Americans learned that Napoleon Bonaparte controlled New Orleans, the critical port where Western farmers shipped their produce, alarm spread. Jefferson wrote to Robert Livingston, the U.S. minister in France, "The day that France takes possession of New Orleans, we must marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation." Jefferson instructed Livingston to negotiate for the purchase of New Orleans and the Floridas, authorizing up to $10 million. But Napoleon, facing a slave rebellion in Haiti and impending war with Britain, had lost interest in a North American empire. He needed money. In April 1803, to the American shock, Napoleon offered not just New Orleans but all of Louisiana for $15 million, averaging less than 3 cents per acre. Livingston and James Monroe, who had just arrived in Paris, knew they had no authority to accept such an offer. They also knew this chance might never come again. They agreed. The historic transaction is known as the Louisiana Purchase, and the acquisition of approximately 827,000 square miles would double the size of the United States. When news reached Jefferson on July 4, 1803, he faced a dilemma. He had always advocated strict construction of the Constitution. The federal government could exercise only powers explicitly granted. Nowhere did the Constitution authorize purchasing territory. Jefferson considered proposing a constitutional amendment, but his Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin assured him that the deal would be permissible under the Constitution's treaty-making provisions. Jefferson made a pragmatic decision. The Senate ratified the treaty overwhelmingly. America had acquired an empire of liberty, vast territories where free farmers could settle, where opportunity beckoned to future generations, where the Republican experiment could expand without becoming despotic. Jefferson commissioned Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore this new domain. Their expedition, 1804 to 1806, mapped a path to the Pacific, establishing America's claim to the continent and embodying the spirit of a free people pushing boundaries, seeking knowledge, embracing the future. Not everything succeeded. Jefferson's Embargo Act of 1807, meant to avoid war by stopping all American trade with Britain and France, crippled the economy without achieving its goals. It was a rare reminder that even well-intentioned government intervention often produces unintended consequences. When Jefferson threatened war against Barbary pirates who demanded tribute from American ships, he sent the Navy instead of paying, declaring that America would spend millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. The principle, a free nation bows to no extortionists. Chapter 8, The Sage of Monticello, 1809 to 1826. In March 1809, Jefferson gladly left the presidency. He was 65, exhausted by political battles, and longing for Monticello. He would never again leave Virginia, spending his final 17 years as the Sage of Monticello. He reconciled with John Adams through a remarkable correspondence that lasted until both men's deaths. They debated philosophy, reminisced about the Revolution, and reflected on the American experiment they had helped launch. Jefferson remained optimistic. "I have no fear that the result of our experiment will be that men may be trusted to govern themselves." But Jefferson's greatest final project was educational. He believed that liberty required an informed citizenry. "Enlighten the people generally," he wrote, "and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day." In 1818, the Virginia legislature authorized a state university, and Jefferson was appointed to the commission responsible for selecting its site, choosing plans, and executing them. The legislature named and chartered the University of Virginia on January 25, 1819. Jefferson designed every detail. The campus would be an academical village, pavilions where professors lived and taught, connected by colonnades, surrounding a great lawn, with the rotunda, modeled on Rome's Pantheon, housing the library at its head. No chapel dominated the campus. Jefferson insisted the university be secular, independent of religious control. He wanted a place where the illimitable freedom of the human mind could flourish. The university finally opened on March 7, 1825. Jefferson, though frail, hosted Sunday dinners at Monticello for faculty and students, living the vision he had championed: free inquiry, open debate, education as the bulwark of liberty. Chapter 9, Final Days and Enduring Legacy. By early 1826, Jefferson's health declined rapidly. He was 83, burdened by debts, watching his beloved Monticello slip toward sale, yet his mind remained sharp and his spirit undimmed. As July 4th approached, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration, Americans prepared grand celebrations. Jefferson received invitations but was too weak to attend. He wrote his last public letter, reaffirming faith in the principles of 1776, that all men are created equal, that self-government is humanity's natural right, that America's example would inspire the world. On July 3rd, Jefferson drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point he asked, "Is it the 4th?" "Not yet," he was told. He held on. Thomas Jefferson died at Monticello on July 4, 1826, just hours before John Adams passed away at his home in Massachusetts. Adams's last words, reportedly, were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." In a sense, he was right. Jefferson had composed his own epitaph, refusing to mention his governorship, his presidency, his diplomatic service. He wished to be remembered for 3 achievements. Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. These, he believed, were his gifts to posterity, the tools of liberty, a declaration of human rights, a law protecting conscience, and an institution to enlighten future generations. Epilogue: The Paradox and the Promise. Thomas Jefferson was not a perfect man. The contradiction at the heart of his life, championing liberty while owning slaves, haunts his legacy and challenges us still. He knew slavery was wrong, called it a moral depravity and a hideous blot, yet he never freed most of his slaves and profited from their labor. This failure to resolve the gap between his ideals and his actions remains his greatest tragedy. Some historians emphasize these contradictions to diminish Jefferson's achievements. Others argue that humans are complex, that we can learn from both their virtues and their failures. Jefferson himself might have agreed. He believed each generation must think anew, question inherited assumptions, and strive to realize ideals more fully. What endures from Jefferson's life? The power of ideas. Jefferson understood that ideas shape history. The Declaration's assertion that all men are created equal didn't instantly end slavery or extend voting rights to all, but it planted a seed that would grow. Abraham Lincoln would later say that Jefferson's words gave liberty not alone to the people of this country, but hope to all the world, for all future time. Limited government. Jefferson's vision of a government that protects rights without stifling freedom influenced generations of Americans. His belief in states' rights, strict construction of the Constitution, and fiscal responsibility continues to resonate in debates about federalism and limited government. Religious liberty. Jefferson's fight for religious freedom established that government has no business dictating belief. This principle, radical in the 18th century, became foundational to American identity. Education as liberation. Jefferson saw education as the foundation of Republican government. An ignorant people cannot remain free, and enlightened people cannot long be enslaved. This conviction inspired public education movements and continues to remind us that democracy requires an informed citizenry. The American spirit. More than any specific policy, Jefferson embodied a spirit, optimistic, forward-looking, confident in human potential. He believed America could show the world that people need not be ruled by kings or priests, that ordinary citizens could govern themselves if given knowledge and opportunity. In Jefferson's America, we find a vision still worth striving for, a land where government serves rather than rules, where individuals pursue happiness free from tyranny, where reason and education triumph over ignorance and superstition, where each person's rights are sacred and inviolable. The flame Jefferson helped kindle burns yet. It lights our debates about freedom and order, rights and responsibilities, individual liberty and common good. Jefferson would want us to question, to debate, to think for ourselves. He would remind us that liberty is never truly won but must be defended anew by each generation. And he would tell us, as he told his countrymen in 1776, that we possess certain truths, self-evident, unalienable, endowed by our Creator, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is Thomas Jefferson's America. This is the republic he helped build, imperfect but striving, flawed but free, a beacon of hope that, in Jefferson's own words, lights the world for all future time. Author's note. This narrative draws on historical scholarship, including insights from Thomas E. Woods, Jr., whose work emphasizes the Jeffersonian Republican tradition of limited government, states' rights, and individual liberty. Woods's Austro-Jeffersonian perspective, presented in lectures and books like The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, highlights Jefferson's commitment to strict constitutional interpretation and his opposition to centralized power. The story also relies on primary sources including Jefferson's letters, the Declaration of Independence, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and accounts from the Library of Congress, the National Archives, Monticello's historical resources, and leading Jefferson scholars. While told from a patriotic perspective that emphasizes Jefferson's contributions to American liberty, it acknowledges the complex and troubling aspects of his life, particularly his ownership of slaves. Jefferson's legacy invites us to celebrate American ideals while honestly confronting the gap between principle and practice, a challenge that remains urgent today.